I got fired in front of everyone, conference room packed, all eyes on me, the CEO smiling like he'd won. But he underestimated me. I didn't panic. I didn't argue. I had been preparing for this moment for months. While they celebrated my supposed downfall, I quietly froze their system, locked their files, and watched chaos spread. Emails bounced, deals stalled, internal communications collapsed. Their empire, built on arrogance and shortcuts, crumbled like dominoes. And I sat back, calm, watching the people who humiliated me scramble helplessly, learning the hard way that patience and planning beat pride every time. My name is Kara Sullivan, and it happened on a Wednesday morning, the kind of midweek where everyone's coffee-fueled energy is just enough to mask underlying tension, when the CEO, Richard Langford, called a team-wide meeting in the glass-walled conference room, the kind designed to make you feel observed and small at the same time, and 20 minutes in, he abruptly slammed his hand on the table, looked at me with that familiar mix of contempt and arrogance, and said, "Kara, you're terminated effective immediately," which, to be honest, didn't shock me as much as the way he did it, in front of my entire team, with laptops open, phones recording, and the HR director perched in the corner pretending to look calm, while I quietly processed the absurdity of the situation, because yes, I had been documenting everything for months, knowing this might happen. The humiliation, intended to break me, bounced off instead, because I had something they didn't. I had a system under my control, access privileges they assumed were meaningless, and months of meticulously prepared safeguards and backdoors I'd installed quietly as part of my role as Director of IT and Systems Integration, a position that gave me far more control over internal workflows than anyone realized, including the CEO, who thought firing me in public meant winning. I didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't try to convince anyone of my value, because the people who think appearances matter never see the whole picture, and instead I nodded, thanked Richard for clarifying the company's direction, gathered my things calmly, and left the room with the same serene expression I used to code complex network automations, because the moment he thought he'd crushed me was actually the moment I began executing the plan I'd quietly built for revenge, and it started immediately as I returned to my workstation, connected to the internal servers I had architected, where I activated a series of scripts I'd been preparing for exactly this scenario, scripts that froze critical workflows, locked key documents, rerouted emails, and prevented access to financial, operational, and client data, all in a way that looked like a massive system failure rather than intentional sabotage, because subtlety, timing, and patience are the real weapons in corporate revenge, and by the time the panic began, I was already observing it unfold in real time. Within 15 minutes, managers were calling IT frantically, the CEO's phone was ringing non-stop, and internal chat channels erupted with confusion and fear, while I sat back with iced coffee in hand, calmly monitoring logs, documenting every reaction, every frustrated email, every failed login, knowing that this was exactly the storm I had predicted, and it was beautiful to watch, because the same arrogance that led them to fire me publicly now led them to overreact, make poor decisions, and escalate the problem faster than I could have scripted. Over the next several hours, the CEO attempted to coordinate a manual override, bringing in consultants, asking employees who weren't involved to troubleshoot, and holding impromptu meetings that achieved nothing because every file he needed, every account he thought he could control, was frozen or rerouted to decoy directories I had created months in advance, complete with fake contracts, project timelines, and misleading internal memos, all designed to confuse, frustrate, and stall any real progress. And the best part was watching him try to explain the situation to the board, fumbling, stumbling over explanations, while all evidence pointed to a massive IT failure caused by mismanagement, not realizing that I was behind every perfectly timed glitch and every confusing redirect. The team who had watched me get fired now approached me with whispered questions, asking if I could fix it or help recover, and I smiled politely, because the only people who got help were those who had respected me, and everyone else was part of the lesson, the live demonstration of what happens when you underestimate the person you humiliate. While the CEO spent hours in crisis mode, issuing memos that contradicted themselves, calling clients who received partially corrupted reports, and struggling to maintain credibility as deadlines were missed, while I documented every interaction, every error, every panicked email, ready for the board review that would follow, and by the next morning, The board itself was involved, asking questions about governance, internal controls, and risk oversight, all triggered by the massive system collapse that I had orchestrated, while I quietly watched from a distance, recovering my pride and reinforcing a lesson that arrogance is fragile, and control is only as strong as the person who wields it. By midweek, consultants had verified what the internal IT team suspected but could not prove: critical files had been accessed, locked, and redirected in ways that seemed accidental but were traceable, and the board demanded an explanation of how this could happen, which left the CEO fumbling, his credibility in tatters, while my name, though officially terminated, circulated as the architect who built the systems everyone relied on, which of course, was technically true, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone who had witnessed my firing, because public humiliation is temporary, but documented influence and system mastery can last indefinitely. In the following weeks, several senior executives were reassigned or quietly left, while I received confidential inquiries from clients, competitors, and board members asking if I was available to consult, because someone who can freeze a corporate empire without a physical confrontation is invaluable, and I realized that revenge isn't about anger or exposure, it's about precision, patience, and leveraging expertise they assume is replaceable, and by the time the CEO finally regained partial control, the empire he thought he ruled was permanently weakened, trust was eroded, and the lesson that the next generation of leaders would remember was clear: never humiliate the person who actually runs the systems, because sometimes the quietest revenge is the most devastating. And the people who cheered during my firing ended up watching the fallout, learning that arrogance, public humiliation, and underestimating others can collapse even the most carefully constructed empires, and in corporate America, reputation is fragile, power is conditional, and the person you think is gone can quietly pull the strings that topple it all.